All right, so this week's Torah portion is Parashat Miketz. So, I can't talk about it without first showing you the best representation that's ever existed.
Guess what? In his bed, Pharaoh had an uneasy night. He had a dream that pinned him to his sheets with fright. No one knew the meaning of the dream. What to do? Whatever could it mean? Then his butler said,
I know of a bloke in jail who is hot on dreams, could explain old Pharaoh's tale.
Pharaoh said,
Well, fetch this Joseph man. I need him to help me if he can.
Oh, Pharaoh, what you gonna do? Dreams are haunting you. Hey, what you gonna do? Chain the bound, afraid, alone. Joseph stood before the throne.
My service to Pharaoh has begun. Tell me your problems, mighty one.
Pharaoh is in the building! Well, I was wandering along the banks of the river when 7 fat cows came out of the Nile. Oh yeah. And right behind these fine, healthy animals came 7 other cows that were skinny and vile. And then the thin cows ate the fat cows, which I thought were doing good. Oh yeah. But it didn't make them fatter like I thought a monster summer should. Oh no, because the thin cows were as thin as they had ever been. Oh, this dream has got me baffled, hey Joseph. What does it mean? Now you know that kings ain't stupid, but I don't have a clue. Don't you be true, Joseph. Help me now, I beg of you. I was standing doing nothing in a field out of town when I saw 7 beautiful ears of corn. Oh yeah. Oh, they were ripe, they were golden, but you guessed it, right behind them there were 7 other ears that were tattered and torn. Then the bad corn ate the good corn, man. They came up from behind, yes they did. But Joseph, here's a punchline. It's really gonna blow your mind, flip your lid. Because the bad corn was as bad as it had ever been. Well, this dream has got me all shook up. Treat me nice, tell me what it means.
Well, I understand a bit about the corn, but I'm not quite sure about the cows. So I was wondering if you could just give it to me one more time, Mr. Pharaoh man. Please?
Let me show you how we rock and roll in Egypt.
I was standing doing nothing in a field out of town when I saw 7 beautiful ears of corn. Oh yeah. Oh, they were ripe, they were golden, but you guessed it, right behind them there were 7 other ears that were tattered and torn. Oh. And then the bad corn ate the good corn, man, they came up from behind, yes they did. But Joseph, here's the punchline, it's really gonna blow your mind. This is gonna flip your lid, because the bad one was as bad as it had ever been. Well, this dream has got me all shook up. Treat me nice, tell me what it means. Hey, 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 Joseph, won't you tell poor Pharaoh what does this crazy dream mean? Oh, yeah.
So there you go. That's the whole Parsha. You're welcome. Goodbye. No, I'm just kidding. But the whole,
Picture.
I have made, what?
That's just what I pictured as I was
Yeah.
reading.
You know, I saw that play, I was probably 8 or 9, maybe 10. And I got that the king, like that Pharaoh was dressed like the king, or was just like Elvis because he's the king. But literally this morning, I think is the first time I ever realized also they both live in Memphis. Like Memphis, Egypt, Memphis, Tennessee. That
Really?
yeah, that's the first time I made that connection too. Anyway,
How do you know they lived in Memphis? It doesn't say that.
well, that's where like the pharaohs,
Pharaoh house was?
yeah, in ancient Egypt is like
I
the
didn't know that.
in the Exodus it says pharaohs, all of the new building projects happen in Ramses, the town of Ramses, but in like ancient Egyptian archaeology, the seat of the royalty was in Memphis. Anyway.
You can talk to me.
What?
Not to mention Pharaoh's blue suede shoes.
Blue suede shoes. Yeah. Also famous for in ancient Egyptian archaeology.
I'm sure.
So the Parsha start. Sorry, go ahead, David.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, is that a link available that we could watch it again?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. This one is the Show Must Go On channel, which has a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber clips, but throughout YouTube, you can find the whole movie or the whole play. I love that stage production too. I was telling Mom that like, I think it's one of the best recorded stage productions because the way they incorporate the narrator and the kids, that it still feels like it's cinematic. It's not just a recording of the stage itself, but it's not a movie. It feels like you're watching the play.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Parsha opens with that scene, basically, right? Like it starts with Pharaoh's dreams, and Joseph is brought out to interpret them, which he does well. And Pharaoh is pretty immediately like sold on Joseph. He's like, great, this tracks. I appreciate your interpretations. We're gonna put your plan into action. He like appoints Joseph immediately to this high-ranking office. He gives him a wife, which I was looking at the commentaries around that verse today specifically too, because I mean, I guess he's Pharaoh, he can do whatever he wants, but it seems kind of weird that Pharaoh gives Joseph someone else's daughter as a wife. Like, I don't know, somehow in my mind, I'd always like remembered as not as a member of the royal family, that's why Pharaoh gets to do that, but she's not, and all the commentaries explain why it was important specifically for Joseph to marry into Potiphar's family so that Potiphar wouldn't have any claim on his children as Potiphar's slaves, because Potiphar had last owned Joseph. So like, that's interesting. It doesn't really answer the question as to like what that conversation with Pharaoh was like. And I guess if you're king, you get to just do that and there doesn't need to be an explanation, but it seemed a little odd to me. Anyway,
It's good to be the king.
it's good to be the king. He marries Asenath and he has 2 children, which have names that are very like bittersweet, that they really give name to his gratitude at his success in Egypt, and also sort of his loneliness and his the struggle that it took to get to that success, and that he still feels like a stranger in a strange land kind of thing. And then of course this famine that Joseph has helped prepare for by interpreting Pharaoh's dreams reaches Canaan, and his brothers come to see him. I mean, they don't know it's him. They come to Egypt to get food because they hear about the stockpiling. And this whole exchange happens with Joseph pretending not to know them, and I'll give you some food, but I don't really trust you. I'm going to keep one of your brothers as collateral, and you have to bring back the other brother that didn't come with you, and all this. And they do, but it's like, it's difficult. Jacob is very reticent to let Benjamin go. And he says like, you've already, like, Joseph is gone and now Shimon is gone and now you want to take Benjamin from me too. But like, theoretically, the promise is if Benjamin goes with the other brothers to get more food, Shimon will come back. But I don't know if we are meant to read this as so mistrustful that Jacob is worried he's just going to lose a 3rd kid, or if he just doesn't care about Shimon as much as Benjamin, that he's not willing to even risk it to get Shimon back. So that's kind of an interesting read. But eventually they go, they're out of food again. So like, what choice do they have? So Jacob sends the family, and the Parsha ends with Joseph planting the golden cup in Benjamin's flour sack and framing him for theft, and telling them the rest of them can go home, including Shimon, but he's keeping Benjamin. And that's where the Parsha ends. So the great Calypso number of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat starts next week's Parsha. We'll watch that next week. But that's, yeah, so that's the Parsha. Were there any particular parts that jumped out at you, or questions that you had, places to start from your perspective? No?
Two things regarding Jacob and whether or not he was mistrustful or didn't care about Shimon.
Yeah.
My sense was he just didn't believe that if they went away, they would come back, that maybe the brothers had already done something to Shimon and then they were going to do something else to Benjamin.
That's true.
Or maybe the Egyptians would.
Do you think that at this point, Jacob has any belief? Like, do you think he thinks they've already done something to Shimon because he started to become suspicious about what really happened to Joseph? Or just in general, that he's nervous?
I think what happened to Joseph makes him prone to be suspicious when the brothers come back without another brother.
Okay.
There's getting to be a pattern.
I see.
Although it's like 13 years, right?
Yeah.
Joseph's 30.
Yeah.
And the other thing that struck me, but I have no idea about it, is when they used Jacob, and when they used Israel as his name.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like when they were talking about the family leaving to go to Egypt, then he was Israel.
Right, because he represents the whole, the country, it's not a country yet, but he represents the land and the the rootedness, the beginning of the tribe of the nation. So there's that. And somehow I was reading also, that's not in this Parsha, but one of the commentaries I was looking at brought me all the way to Jacob's embalming, and they use Israel for all of that too, which is interesting, that the Egyptians wail for Israel for 70 days when he dies. But we'll get there in a couple weeks, but maybe next week. But it is interesting, and we talked about that last week or 2 weeks ago too, about when Jacob is called Jacob and when he's called Israel, and that I'm not entirely sure that there's, I think like in that case, when they're leaving and they leave Israel behind, I think there is a symbolism to it, but I think often it's probably really a result of different authors or different traditions that got woven together. And, you know.
Gotcha.
Were there other questions? I read a book once called Asenath. I don't know. It's spelled differently depending on what transliteration you're looking at. The Hebrew, hold on, let me pull up the Hebrew, is Osnat, right? Because there's no TH actually in Hebrew. Osnat. No, that is an Os. Anyway, but I read like it's sort of Red Tent-esque. It's a, you know, novel from the point of view of Asenath, and it wasn't very well written, but it was very compelling, and I want more of that. Yeah, untold stories of the women of the Bible. There is Midrash also that claims she either is Dinah or is the daughter of Dinah, the sister that disappears from the narrative. Which I don't know if that helps Joseph's case at all. But you know, for the rabbis that are uncomfortable with the idea that Joseph has completely assimilated and married an Egyptian woman and all that, that's sort of how they get around that.
Well, why was that uncomfortable for them?
For the rabbis, you know, there's just a lot of angst about intermarriage. And I think it's like in the Torah, obviously everyone like at that time, there's only one family of Jews. You know, that term doesn't exist yet. So, but when, first of all, they do marry still their cousins and they keep it within the clan. And then the assumption with Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah is that then they follow their husband's monotheism. Joseph being in Egypt, being away from the rest of his family, if he marries an Egyptian, I think there's more of an implication that he's assimilating rather than her assimilating into his culture. And so that was, you know, of concern to them. If he's this hero of the story and this mouthpiece for God, right? He has this divine gift of interpreting dreams, then he's got to be like a good Jewish family man too. But this is one of the sections too of Torah where I love that, like, you know, Pharaoh supposedly is very beholden to his own pantheon, right? Like in ancient Egyptian culture, he's the human embodiment of Ra, I think, one of the gods, the sun god. And like that he could even accept Joseph's words. And he says like the spirit of God comes through this man. And whether or not for him, does he mean the spirit of Ra? Does he know Hashem? Like, but either way, the fact that he recognizes that is a pretty big moment. And I always think it's interesting. It happens several times throughout the Tanakh where a leader from another culture recognizes our God or our prophets in such a way that's like, you know, I mean, obviously it's written by our people, right? Like the narrative is skewed, but it's a good moment, I think, for that like cross-cultural capability. Like Pharaoh doesn't then become Jewish or Israelite or whatever. He doesn't convert the whole kingdom, but he accepts this truth.
I don't know, that kind of seems unreal to me. And then I kind of think, well, you know, it was written by people that wanted that to be the truth and not
Yes.
necessarily the truth.
Sure.
Well, also, if she's Egyptian, then are the sons Jews or Egyptians? Or Israelites or Egyptians?
Or both?
They're both, yeah. I mean, they get the blessing. Like you know, at the end of the book of Genesis, at the end of the book of Genesis, when Jacob's on his deathbed and he gives his blessing to the other 11 sons, and then instead of giving a blessing directly to Joseph, he gives it to both of Joseph's sons. He doesn't do that for any of the other grandchildren. And we don't know really anything about the other wives. Presumably they're Canaanite or something, because Laban had 2 daughters. Like we're out of cousins to marry. So, yeah. So I don't know. So I think there's something to be said about that too, that Jacob gives his blessing only to those 2 grandchildren. And Ephraim and Manasseh then, so like those become tribes when we enter the Holy Land several generations later. They each get a portion of land because the Levites don't. So there's still 12 divisions, but Joseph's is split into 2 and the Levites don't get land. So they're fully eventually assimilated into Israelite, like they're fully accepted, but as children they were probably raised, like the actual boys of Shimon and Manasseh were probably raised more as Egyptians, right? Their father is considered royalty in Pharaoh's court.
Also, Jacob favors Rachel's children.
Yes,
So he
and
might
thus the
favor
grandchildren.
grandchildren.
And we don't really know about Benjamin's family
Progeny.
life. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I guess he must have some because there is a tribe of Benjamin. Like his line doesn't die out. But maybe they weren't born yet when Jacob died. I don't know. But I agree with you, Michelle. I mean, a lot of it's like it's a little too tidy.
It's supposed to be messy.
And a lot of the interpersonal stuff is very messy. But the way that everything it's all fate, it all falls into place right the way it needs to. The leaders recognize God's power. The leaders of other countries that don't recognize God recognize God's power and give our people the space they need to realize their fates, their destinies. So, yeah, it's a lot. That's what makes it such a good story, worth telling over and over again, right? If Pharaoh just killed Joseph, where would we be?
So I guess the consensus is we have difficulty with happy endings.
A little bit.
But by the end of this parsha, we really don't know if it's a happy ending. You know, because or
Yeah,
the group knows. but
right. If you've read the Torah, you know, but it does end on a cliffhanger.
All
How
right.
about that? But I think you have a hint too, though, because it does, even if you didn't know what happens next, the way that this parsha is written, once we get to that section with the brothers, Joseph wants to, like, he's being harsh on them, but he like excuses himself to cry. Like, he's clearly feeling emotionally affected by all this. He's not just punishing them for the sake of punishing them. Like, he's having his own feels about it that I think gives you a hint that he does want to reconcile. He's just struggling with how to get there.
Well, they were so cruel to him. How is he going to know to trust them?
Right.
I mean, you have to be a lot more forgiving than Dave would ever be. Certainly, you know, I read a couple of commentaries where rabbis thought that Joseph was being unnecessarily cruel, and I thought, no, I think he's being careful, smart. I wouldn't be welcoming them with open arms right off the bat, given their history.
Yeah.
But I did have a question. Joseph says on the occasion of finding the golden goblet that he practices divination with that cup. I didn't know he practiced divination.
I think he's saying that to make the cup more valuable, or that, I don't think he does. First of all, because divination is not allowed in Judaism. I mean, this is before that law is given, but I don't think that the rabbis, like, if that were true, the rabbis would have something to say about it. But also, I think, what?
I think we would have seen divination incidents before.
Exactly.
But so there haven't really been any before. I mean, interpreting dreams is not the same as you know, casting entrails or lots or something and burning things and incantations, or even reading tea leaves. It's a whole different.
Right. We see him.
So I was surprised by that.
Have prophetic dreams and understand them without any other instruments. So I don't think he does use this cup for that. However, what the rabbis say, so Ibn Ezra says that the cup is sort of being used in divination right now because he's using the cup to divine, to see if the men are thieves, like how they will react to finding the cup in their bag, which is, I think that's a fun little interpretation. And then Ramban says, when it says my master, right, because the steward is relaying this information, my master drinks and uses it for divination. What it really means is a man like my master would use this for, so that's sort of what I assumed in the beginning, that it was like, it's a plausible claim to elevate the importance of this cup beyond just that it's gold and valuable, but that it's like also an important piece of the household that they've stolen. Sort of like when Rachel steals the idols. It's not just about the material, it's the attachment and the difference between like Laban's attachment as someone who possibly still prays to them versus Rachel's attachment who probably doesn't or shouldn't. So these boys take this cup that my master uses for divination and you don't even know how to use divination.
In the idea that he's unusually harsh to his brothers, you know, he could have had them all killed. I don't think he is too harsh. I think he's kind. Or maybe not kind, but more gentle than he had to be under the circumstances with the power he had.
Yeah. That's true too.
I mean, he could have had them all thrown in jail or whatever. Instead, he just put them to the test.
He could have had different punishments for each of them. Throw Reuben in a pit, vipers. Sell Judah, and then murder the rest, because that's what they wanted to do to him.
That's right.
And Reuben says, in that scene where they think there's an interpreter in the room, so they think Joseph can't understand them directly, and they're talking amongst themselves. Reuben says, I told you not to lay a hand on the boy. Well, that's not really what you said, Reuben. You suggested throwing him in a pit, theoretically, that you could go rescue him later, but like, you still advocated roughing him up. Like, I guess that's better than outright killing him, but I don't know. You don't quite get a pass here. In my opinion. Were there others? Randy, you look like you have you're contemplating real hard about some of this. Okay.
Just makes me want to sing.
Just me.
Joseph, Jacob.
Jacob and sons. So someone tweeted it's ironic that Stephen Sondheim died on a Andrew Lloyd Webber Shabbat, because these like 4 Shabbats that span the Parsha of the 4 Parshiot that span Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat is canonically Andrew Lloyd Webber Shabbat. Poor Sondheim did not make a Bible musical.
Well, he made a musical that almost became a Bible. West Side Story. Became the part of the canon of American musical theater.
That's true. Originally, West Side Story was about a Jewish, I forget who was the boy and who was the girl. And I also forget now what the other culture was. Something Catholic. It was a Jew and a Catholic. But I forget what the nationality of the Catholic was.
One's in, aren't they both in Italy? Aren't they in, so Romeo and Juliet?
No, yes, but I'm not talking about Romeo and Juliet. I'm talking about the originals play, the script of West Side Story that Sondheim and Bernstein wrote
who would have been the Jew
before then, like the producers or whatever said this won't sell. Nobody cares about the Jews.
And then somebody made Fiddler.
Sorry, Terry, you're muted. I didn't catch that. Oh, okay, on purpose.
I'm sitting in a different room in the house and the dogs are around, so I thought I'd save you all from barking.
Okay.
But yes, I did deeply enjoy that.
Anyway. Yeah, I think Judah also, this is part of Judah's redemption arc, this Parsha. We see it, you know, he starts to get some, I don't know, what?
Backbone.
Yeah, he starts to get some backbone with, well, in the first part of the Joseph story, right? When the other brothers want to kill him and he suggests selling him, that's meant to be read, or the rabbis read that as merciful, because it gets him out of the harm's way of his murderous brothers. And then this stuff with Tamar, where he makes some very questionable choices, but in the end, he recognizes his mistakes and he takes accountability and he says, she is more righteous than I and does right by her and, you know, all of that. So that's part of his like growing up. Now that he's a grandfather, he's growing up. And
their grandfather's very young.
that's true. That's true. And then here, this scene, this is supposed to be like his, you know, the full crest of his redemption arc that he defends Benjamin, and he's like, so he's the one who does most of the talking at the end of this parsha.
And he promises his father, right, that
yes, he's the one who promises his father
he'll keep Benjamin safe.
Yeah, there's something about that. Now I can't remember exactly what the
two of them step up.
Comment, which two?
Is it Judah and Reuben? They'll say to their father, send him with me and I'll ensure us. No?
I don't think so. It's all Judah.
Okay.
Oh, Reuben does say, you can kill my sons if I do not bring Benjamin and Shimon back to you.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Really?
Yeah. That's quite a claim. I guess it harkens a little back to Isaac and Abraham, right? The willingness to sacrifice your son is like, I guess, noble, but also it's not your life to sacrifice. So I don't know if I buy it. Ibn Ezra says this is a prayer to God, that like it's meant to be rhetorical. Also, he says it might be thou shalt punish, that it's meant to not be taken literally. I guess that's kind of the same. So I guess that's the only way to read it, is to try to find a way for it to not be real. But it's pretty troubling.
The next one too, my son must not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he is left alone. Like he doesn't really have 11 brothers or 10 brothers. He only had Joseph, and Joseph's gone. Again, the whole thing with Rachel.
Yeah. Well, so, oh, this is nice. Not nice, but this is a juicy commentary from Genesis Rabbah, from the Midrash. Jacob did not accept Reuben's offer. He said, what a fool is this oldest son of mine. He suggests that I should kill his sons. Are they his only and not mine also? As part of that, I think we talked about that before, about the sort of claiming of all of the potential heirs that the patriarch gets to do. So he's like, this isn't a fair trade-off. Then I just lose more of my inheritors, or like, you know. So yeah, that's really interesting. But to your point about like this, how kind of it still continues to put Rachel's kids on such a pedestal and act like the others don't exist. There's something about the exchange with Judah that makes me feel that way too, that Israel said, why did you serve me so ill as to tell the man that you had another brother? Like, how could Judah have possibly foreseen this chain of events? But Jacob is so quick to blame him, or blame all of the other brothers. And I know that, like, of course I don't know, but I've heard that, you know, losing a child can really tear a family apart, and that it's so complicated, the kind of grief that goes with it and all of that. I get that, but he's so harsh on the other brothers. Without even knowing. I mean, maybe if he knew, what they had done for real. But the fact that presumably Jacob still thinks Joseph was torn apart by a wild animal, and that I guess that his brothers failed to protect him. But like, I don't know, that's a lot to carry around, and to feel like your father doesn't love you.
It's almost like he treats them, the older boys, that they're his workers, they're his, their job is to create more family, to create the nation of Israel. But the two youngest are his sons,
Right.
are his children.
Yeah. Now I can't remember exactly the commentary that I felt really spoke to the emotion in this parsha, in this section specifically. I'm at the beginning of chapter 43. But it's somewhere in Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg's chapter on this, in her book of The Beginnings of Desire is her Genesis book. So she has a chapter for each parsha, and her chapter on this one really gets to the heart of like the psychology of like a grieving family and the family dynamics with Judah here at play. And I know, like, he's a grown man at this point, but it still just seems so painful, the exchange with their father and the responsibility he takes on. Maybe it's hard to have 13 children and give them all equal attention. It's a lot of kids.
It's also in the eye or the heart of the child, whether that love was equal or not. It's not
That's
always
true.
interpreted. And I think if we had more information about the interactions, we would have a better sense of what Jacob knew. I mean, in families where there's trauma, it's thought that very often the parents know or have an inkling, unless they're in complete denial. So it seems to me to be reasonable that Jacob had some idea that something wasn't right.
That the brothers had done something to Joseph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then add to that, if they had any misgivings or guilt, that could make for pretty messy
Yeah.
Thanksgiving dinners.
Yeah. Do you ever wonder, so again, we're skipping ahead a little bit, but next week, Joseph does tell them that he knows who they are, tells them who he is, forgives them, gives them a place to live, and everybody lives happily ever after. But like, even after that, could you all sit down and have a family meal? I don't know. I feel like there's still a lot of toxicity there that it would be hard to completely overcome.
Well, but Joseph sort of acknowledges that in the names of his children.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so maybe that's giving it away.
It's giving it away, giving it a name so that it doesn't sit on you. I don't know. Imagine playing with your cousin though, whose like name means your father tried to kill my father. Like, I don't know. It's not that literal.
It's a little more obscure.
But
my difficulties are.
Yeah. God has blessed me in the land of my affliction.
Yeah.
Is one of them. Any last questions or thoughts? We have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure everybody's feels they've dug into the Torah portion as much as they need to. David, Bruce, you've been quiet.
I've been enjoying what everyone else is saying, and I'm still thinking of Elvis in a.
Yeah.
It does make me now want to go and watch the whole.
Right,
documentary.
right. So this has nothing to do with this Parsha or
Okay.
even Judaism, but I was watching The Grinch Who Stole Christmas with Isaac.
Great.
And
The new
it's-
one? The cartoon?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's
But
fine.
I just realized it's a total trauma-based story.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know, gave a different view.
Yeah. Hurt people hurt people. So
True enough.
there's
So
a lot
that's
of
my contribution.
well, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like perpetuating trauma in the Tanakh. And in Judaism.
Bringing us back. Thank you.
we have trouble sometimes, not trouble learning from our mistakes necessarily, but trouble figuring out how to do it differently, like how to move forward, right? That's
Absolutely.
the difficulty of familial trauma or epigenetic communal trauma, is that it's so entrenched that like, you know, how do you move forward? This is a huge conversation in Holocaust education, in the Jewish world especially, but that the way it loomed so large for like maybe 20 years for Gen X and, you know, the younger Gen X and earlier millennials when we were all in Hebrew school, that like they find that it basically re-traumatized another generation that didn't necessarily have the epigenetic markers. And so like, how do we now teach the Gen Z and the younger in a way that like fully communicates the horrors and the like the political steps to lead to it, all the things to help prevent it ever happening again, but without traumatizing them again. And
I
like,
think a lot of it depends on the ability of the, if you will, the student to empathize.
yes. Yeah, and some of that's completely out of the educator's hand, because that has to do with the family life and the like attachment style, like, you know, by the time the kid gets to you, that's done. Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, it's complicated.
It is. It's a slippery slope.
Yeah. And it's all in our text, so much of it. I mean, the Holocaust feels like the most relevant piece like that because it is in living memory still, not for much longer, but it is. And the scope of the horror is so big, in a way that like nothing else really was in our history. As terrible as all the pogroms and everything. But those pogroms also, like, and the text itself, the story of Passover starting with a theoretical genocide. How many of our holidays are based on overcoming genocide? You know, and whether or not those things really happened, like the fact that the Purim story is probably a political farce and like actually Jews in Persia were pretty well treated. but like that's part of our cultural narrative. Like how do you raise kids to not feel kind of traumatized when they're told that everyone throughout history has always wanted to kill you?
Well, I keep hearing it, critical race theory, and I really don't. I have a sense, but not enough to speak about it. But I feel like there's some connection.
Sure. Like, how do you talk about difficult parts of history in a way that's educational and encourages empathy and compassion and progress in society without like reliving those horrors that you're teaching about
and reinforcing,
re-imprinting them
mm-hmm.
in our brains and our genetic code.
Well, Ted Cruz might not like this idea, but maybe we should bring in Big Bird and his friends to help.
Listen,
you're absolutely right.
Characters and Mr. Rogers knew what they were doing.
Absolutely.
We all raised our children and educated more on their models.
But now they just have to be faster paced because kids don't have the patience to watch Mr. Rogers.
Well, they watch Daniel Tiger. It's not too
move,
far
though. It's got to move.
Yeah, it's got to move. Yeah, it's got to have catchy songs.
There you go. And blinking lights. And
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood isn't a catchy song.
But it's the only one, right?
Yeah,
like Daniel Tiger has several songs, or has at least another song throughout the episode. It's not just the theme song. Kava, do your kids watch Daniel Tiger?
Yeah, it's like one of the only ones that I approve because it's got slow moving pictures and they talk slow enough that the kids can actually absorb something.
It's meant to teach. It's not meant to just like
entertain.
Yeah.
Overstimulate.
Yeah.
Now, I have two grandsons that are like days away from being 5, and I cannot get them to engage in playing, an age appropriate card game or board game. And I don't know if it's just these two little guys or if it's symptomatic of
because what do they want to do instead?
Well, I mean, being at grandma's house is a little different anyway.
Right.
They want to play Legos, or they want, that's not bad. Or they want to watch a video on TV is usually.
Yeah, no.
Or jump on the sofa or something.
Or jump on. That's, not always the way. My nieces have a little trampoline and they still sometimes jump on the sofa. I'm like, you can move 5
How about
feet.
you, Michelle? Do you notice that at all? Or is it different?
Ulysses, who just turned 5, will play a board game. But he's fast to tears when he's not winning or doesn't think he's winning. And so it takes a little bit of emotional maturity to be able to.
That's typical of that age anyway.
Yeah. Especially when, his sister, who's just 17 months older, can be quite a force to deal with, So, yeah. At our house, we don't turn the TV on unless it's absolutely necessary, or they've done something that they really had to do and didn't want to do, and we do it as a reward. In fact, they were here before Thanksgiving, and Sunday morning, when they first got up, we ate, and they played with almost toys, all my old Fisher Price stuff for when the boys were growing up. And then around 9:30, Geneva asked to do crafts. and we were still doing crafts when Ben came to pick him up lunchtime. And
Nice.
Very
in fact,
nice.
we were so involved, I didn't even realize he had texted me to say he was on his way. So, yeah, and so that was the first time, the first day, I think we never even turned the TV on, which it is unusual. So, yeah.
I was gonna ask if they would get involved in baking.
Yes.
Yeah, we do that, we do that too.
Yeah,
But
we
I
do
would think
too.
5 is just about the age to start making, chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah.
Can he stand up near the counter? Do you have a bench?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have him stand on a chair.
Or whatever, that's
stool,
usually what they do, yeah.
Well, I will just share this. Isaac was over, we were playing adventure in the backyard, lots of leaves, lots of trees. And he goes, "Let's run, Grandma," because zombies were coming or something. And I made my best effort and he goes, "Come on, Grandma, run." I said, "I am."
Oh my gosh.
Bless you, Hava. So, yeah. Well, it sounds like we are all doing our best. Spread the love, spread the word, raise resilient children and grandchildren. Don't name them the blessing of my affliction, We learn from our text this way. So,
Thank you, Rabbi.
yes.
Although these days, kids are starting to have very different names than names in the last 50 years.
That's true. But sometimes it's just cultural. Sometimes you get some weird names.
Yes. But some really cool ones too come out of, I don't know, unusual names.
Yeah. Asher's really popular right now. That's all I know.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, we talked about that. Wasn't that popular 40 years ago, so I used it as a middle name. But
It has a
like
nice sound.
Yeah, it has a nice flow, actually.
Yeah.
I'm just, when my first grandson was born, Matt said they went to the Social Security lists for names and tried to go back, 100 years ago because they wanted to have, name. Matt was probably one of the 50 million Matts in his class. And, he wanted his kids to have names that, weren't that common, and he succeeded. He has an Asen and Opal, which are old names and not that common, and they don't have kids in their class with that name. And my other grandkids are Geneva and Ulysses, which are even more uncommon.
Yeah.
So go figure.
But that was smart to go back to the Social Security,
Yeah, that was clever.
Instead of trying to make something up whole cloth, because then you get something that no one's ever going to get to
Yeah,
spell.
well,
And no one's going to know how to spell it. Whatever.
Yeah. So I think they even did that for some of their animals. Their dog is called Otto.
Love it.
So go figure. Anyhow, on that note.
Good talking, everyone. See you next week.
All right, happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Yes, happy Hanukkah.
Thank you,
Happy
Rabbi.
Hanukkah.